Hello, everybody. My name is David from VVI Academy. We're all the way here in Bali, Indonesia today for Coinfest Asia 2024. With me today, I'm sure you guys may have recognized as Yat Siu, one of the leading figures within this space. So without further ado, could you give us a quick introduction, a little bit about yourself and maybe Animoca as well?
Sure, my pleasure. My name is Yat Siu. I'm chairman and co-founder of Animoca Brands, a company that for the last 5-6 years has been really trying to develop digital property rights in the space. We are today one of the largest investors in Web3, although interesting enough, we're not a fund in the traditional sense. We invest on our balance sheet. So we have over 540 portfolio companies today. Quite a few of them, obviously, in the gaming space. I get most known for, Sandbox and Axie Infinity, of course, the SkyMaven's team, backing Ronin, Pixels, Decentraland, and of course also our participation in L1, L2s, particularly most recently the Ton ecosystem, Telegram, for instance, it's one we've been backing very heavily. But yeah, and then of course, we're building our own projects like the Mochaverse, which is our ID solution. We're on sort of building more reputation in the space. And as a builder operator, of course, building games as well and growing Web3 broadly.
Awesome. So what got you into Web3 in the first place? And for starters as well, a lot of our audience, we're trying to attract Web2 developers as well as a lot of people who are not really aware of Web3. Yeah. What is so special about Web3 and what does blockchain really brings that's not possible really before?
So the big moment for us was our studio actually in 2017 was involved in helping build CryptoKitties back in the day. And that actually was the moment where we really understood their potential. It wasn't so much on the Bitcoin side, it was much more on NFTs. And NFTs to us really represent a way in which you can immortalize and store digital culture as something you can own. If you're a gamer, for instance, you might want to own something that you've had achieved. I mean, I was a very, very avid gamer many, many years ago. And I wish I could keep those items from before, not necessarily to sell them or trade them, but just to prove that I did it, right? But when the game shuts down, you lose all of that. That's how it started. And so that's why we built our thesis around blockchain gaming. But it expanded a lot since more, because then we started to understand that actually this isn't just about owning gaming assets. This is about owning our digital time. Because what actually is valuable in Web3 is the network effect. So when you own an Ethereum token, for instance, you're not owning a yield-generating asset particularly. You're actually owning a very unique type of asset that represents the value of the network as a whole. And that's not been done before. So it's similar that when you own, for instance, a token like AXS, for instance, or Mocha, you're not owning specifically something that has value in terms of generating yield, but you're a member of that network, and that actually gives you access to the network effects. And when that network grows, then you can grow with it, right? And that's something that we thought would be the future, because that's the way in which we as end users can finally participate in having this, really, if you think about it, odd concept of we can now own the internet. And when you go talk to someone who's not from Web3, you say, you can own the internet. They say, what bullshit is that, right? Like, how can I own this thing that I can't touch, right? But in reality, the internet is currently controlled by big platforms. And we are able to take that away and make it owned by the people, as it were. And that's why we got so excited it was happening in Web3. It's the principle is you can now own your digital time, your digital assets, your network effects, and basically have sovereign ownership over everything around sort of your virtual experience. And remember, we spend today, on average, depending which country, I think Vietnam's one of the top ones, right? Somewhere between 8 to 10 hours a day online, in some cases more. That's basically most of your living hours. But all that online time, who owns it? Who monetizes it and who gets value from it? Not you, right? Every time you're posting a photo on Instagram, you're actually giving value. Even if you're using OpenAI and you're asking a query, actually OpenAI gets smarter every time you ask a question.
Right.
But do you get paid for asking the question, for making them smarter? Well, every person who's driving a Tesla car, and every time you drive, Tesla gets information about, better route, better clip, traffic, right? But who's giving that information? You, the driver. Do you get paid for that? No, right? And again, Web3 solves all of that. And that's why, in this internet and this web of ownership, it's such a better paradigm. We decided to go all in on everything. And that's why we're much broader today. And that's also why we say our mission is delivering true digital property rights.
Awesome. So a large majority of our audience is actually developers, founders, and we want to be able to equip them with the skills, knowledge necessary to really build and expand on current ecosystem within Web3.
Yeah.
And so one of the fundamental things we want to focus in today's conversation is actually Web3 business fundamentals as well as financials.
Yes.
And so what would you say is some of the most unique attributes about Web3 and blockchain that brings to the table? And from a founder perspective, when is it applicable to apply blockchain, Web3 into the problem that they're solving? And what new opportunities does Web3 enable founders to capture not possible before. And I think you already kind of mentioned a lot of that. Right.
So first, I would say that it is, there are many things that blockchain solves. So I can't list all of them because it's just too many, but I would start with one main fundamental, which is essentially this aspect of you can now scale permissionless trust, right? That's something you couldn't really do before, right? In the sense that you had to trust someone to engage with someone. Like if you think about the foundation of any community, right, or any social construct or any nation, it starts with the basis of trust. Because if I can't trust you, then I can't engage with you. And what is it that trust enables? It's actually the grease for a network effect. If I trust you, we can do business with each other, or we can become friends. And that is the beginning of a network. And if more people trust each other, then the network can become bigger, right? And that's actually one of the fundamental powers of blockchain. And so when you think about building a product in Web3, think about what network effect you're building. And therefore also, when you think of the token, which we think of as a representation of the network effect, how you grow that. So let's take a look at something like Mochaverse. Mochaverse launched its token actually during a really difficult time, right? I mean,
and for context, what is Mochaverse?
So Mochaverse is our, I guess, Mochaverse is a way in which we allow our end users to partake in the network effects of Animoca, our portfolio companies. It's a reputation system as well. We can get into that a little later in how we want to have people build a Web3 reputation anonymously if they so want, but actually where you can stack that reputation like you do in the real world, right? Because we believe very strongly that people care about economic capital, but what they really care about is social, cultural, and symbolic capital, right? Because if you only care about economic capital, then we'd probably try to be anonymous all the time. We wouldn't, care about a university degree. We wouldn't care about our history, but we do care about history. We care so much about history that we even look at our ancestry and we say, what did my grandfather do? And where did he come from? And it means something because it's part of our identity. It's our cultural capital that means something. But in Web3, we didn't have a good way of translating that cultural capital because you can't transfer your reputation, right? And again, I go back to this concept of if you can build strong reputation, actually it greases the network effect, right? It makes it more fluid. Because if you have a good reputation, I can do business with you, right? But if you have a bad reputation, I won't, right? So it's the same thing. Mochaverse aims to build that. And I guess the reason why I wanted to highlight this example is the token was fairly successful because the community was built around reputation and trust. And this is the important part. When you think about launching a token, think about who are the owners of your network. Who are your true fans of that network that help build it? If the majority of the people are only there to make money, then expect very volatile times and expect very, very perhaps sort of movements in the token that might not be beneficial because you attracted a type of user who's there for a particular purpose, right? And again, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that who you bring in will affect the network and the culture and the values that you're building, right? And so that's one important insight, which is all about the network effect, right? So think about that. When you're giving away a token, even when you're selling a token, you're giving away a part of your network effect. It's not giving away your equity. It's something more fundamental.
Right. I like how you mentioned equity because a lot of the conversation we have to, especially even in Vietnam as well, people often associate, token ownership. Isn't that pretty much the same thing as equity?
And it's not at all. It's not at all. I mean, yeah. And so I think if there's an equity component in a token, that to me is more like a security, right? You're part of the company and you have shares in this one. But the network effect is different. So let's take an existing company that maybe people can more relate with. You have Instagram, which has a network effect. And you have Facebook or Meta today, where you can buy shares to own a piece of that. But really, you don't own the network effect, meaning that if I own shares in Meta or Facebook, that doesn't give me a benefit in using Instagram. It doesn't give me more follower power, right? It doesn't make me more influential. It doesn't give me more respect. I don't have a handle when I go on Instagram that says, you're a Facebook shareholder. You're something, right? There's no context around that, right? So actually, you don't own a benefit of the network effect. You simply just own a piece of the company. That's the equity. And that to me is what tokens are. Tokens are representations of your network effects, which also means that not every business might be suitable to be tokenized because not every business has a network effect that it can give out, right? Some companies might benefit from having a network effect that is completely controlled. But actually, and this is the other lovely thing about blockchain, but also struggling thing for people in Web2, is that the more decentralized your network is, actually the more valuable it becomes, right? What happens if Ethereum or Bitcoin was controlled by just a few parties? Its value would not be able to form because you can't trust it the same way. So there's an actual interesting tension between that. So in a sense, you're saying that you're surrendering your control to the community in exchange for growing the network effect. And in Web2, to think about the value of Instagram. It's not what Facebook built per se. It's the users who create content and are building on it. If the users stop using Instagram, Instagram's worth zero. It doesn't matter whatever infrastructure built. It won't have any of these sort of benefits if it wasn't for the end user, right? So again, think of the paradigms of the network effect and understand that what you're building is essentially an expansion and a tool that allows you to build up the network effect. And the other thing I would also say is that it allows mass amateurization of a kind of technology, of a trust technology that wasn't possible before. So for instance, if you wanted to build banking grade infrastructure, you had to replicate what Goldman Sachs built, for instance, or Morgan Stanley built. That costs you $500 million to $1 billion plus, right? But now you have a blockchain that has all that security framework available for the public, which means literally some kid can go and build something that is secure, just like a bank. That is actually quite revolutionary, because what happens is that you amateurize and access that type of technology open to every single person, which is why we see so much innovation in DeFi, for instance, and in Web3 gaming that wasn't possible before, because you could leverage essentially those type of public tech stacks, right? I see it as a kind of open sourcing of the value chain.
Awesome. So reflect our conversation so far. So in your experience over the years, what are some of the best projects, aside from Mochaverse or startups, that you've seen that apply what we've been talking about so far?
So, I mean, it's so many of them, right? I mean, one of the more recent projects that I think have done this really well is what you see with Ton, right? I mean, Ton had the benefit of leveraging the Telegram network effect, and they've done it really successfully. And so I think what we see now is you see the growth of Ton and you see all the people building on it. And what's really interesting is that when you think about how people valued L1, L2s before, they usually looked at the TVL, right? When said, oh, right, how much is on chain? What's interesting, though, is that Ton has grown so much, but it actually doesn't have the deepest TVL. And although that's important, I think it's $600 million, not bad, but it's nothing compared to some of the other chains. But yet it has more utility because, again, it shows that the network effect isn't purely financial. It's also how many users are using, what are they building on it, what are the network effects that they're constructing. So I think Ton has done a really good example of that. I think it's important to remember that in Web3, the network effects are amplified and multiplied in multiple areas. So when you think of the token, it doesn't just represent the utility network effect. It does also represent the financial network effect. But I think we've seen quite a bit of emphasis because of the early nature of Web3 and because of the fact that it's very capitalist as a framework, that it actually has many of the financial network effects that seem to accelerate and actually sometimes are ahead of the utility network effects, just because there's not that many users in Web3 in comparison, right? So we see the projects that have done very well in this area, Ton being one of them. But I think one of the other stories that people sometimes don't talk enough about is what's happening with Axie, Ronin, and Pixels. Right? Those are networks that have gone through many lessons, right? And in some ways, now they really understand that they're building networks. For instance, the Ronin opening up to, before it was really only about Axie Infinity and games that leveraged Axie. And now they've opened it up to other game companies, which have built more network effects. The people who started playing Pixels, many of them started getting introduced to, Pixels gaming, went into Ronin to start playing Axie, for instance. You see the whole ecosystem grow. And again, we're talking about network effects, right? So I think the companies that understand the construction of this are the ones that can help sort of grow these narratives really, really well. There's several examples around that, but, these are some examples that I would highlight.
So would you say that moats in Web3 for a lot of businesses are different than traditional Web2?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the traditional web moat in the Web2 business is essentially monopoly, right? In other words, it's trying to build a monopoly effect around whatever it's building, which is why they all jealously guard, their data and their network effects. For instance, when you think about a network effect between a Facebook or Google or an Apple or TikTok, they don't talk to each other. They're complete islands. And you, as a user or as a developer, need to seek permission and share revenue with them to enter these network effects. But in Web3, it's permissionless. So everyone can build these networks on top of them. And they can even extract them if they wanted to. So for instance, I don't know if you remember back in the day, early days, every L1 or even L2 was an Ethereum killer, right? That was 2018, 2019, right? Because everyone thought, what, if they're going to use my chain and it's better, it's going to take users away. Instead, actually, it grew Ethereum, right? All of those L2s actually ended up creating value into the Ethereum ecosystem and grew it. Why? Because the network effects are shared. It's a permissionless network. If Ton, for instance, were to go to $100, it wouldn't just benefit Ton. The entire ecosystem goes up. It's like Bitcoin. If Bitcoin reaches $100,000 by the end of the year, we hope, but not financial advice. But if it does end up going up in value, what do you think it'll do to the rest of the Web3 ecosystem? It's going to lift it. It's not going to sort of take away value. It's going to do quite the opposite. So again, you don't have the same monopoly effect, which does mean, though, that when you build sort of network effects, and when you try to build a so-called moat, your moat is your community, right? And therefore your community, which is the core of your network, right, is the most valuable thing. You see this in effects, for instance, we're both investors in things like Magic Eden as well as OpenSea, right? And you knew at one point, OpenSea was 99% of the NFT marketplace, right? And of course, now they're number 2, number 3, because they didn't have a natural moat, because I could go after every OpenSea customer and give them an airdrop, an incentive to say, hey, you know what? Come over and try my product. And it wasn't until Blur, basically, where they really sort of cracked that in the way. They've obviously done things that we don't agree with, like sort of basically sort of go against royalties, which we think is a bad move. However, generally speaking, it's a demonstration of the fact that you don't have natural monopolies. To me, the natural advantage of Web3 is an openly capitalist system that actually creates a really open and sort of free and much more fairer market.
Awesome. So on the notion of communities, I like that you mentioned that, because one of the topics for a guest conversation I have a lot with founders, VCs, and a lot of different events. And more recently, we just had an interview with Animoca, who is co-founder at Polygon and founder at Avail. He mentions that the founders, typically first-time founders, they focus solely on the product. Second-time founders, it's also the distribution. And how is distribution different in Web3 compared to Web2?
It's completely different, it's in Web2, distribution is controlled by gatekeepers, right? So is it Apple? Is it Facebook? Is it Google? Is it Steam if you're gaming, right? They're really trying to push through basically these gates because they own the customer, right? I mean, even if I'm building out basically something on Instagram and I'm building a follower base, do you actually know who your followers are, right? You have no idea, but you can't analyze them. You can't really reach them properly, right? And they just tweak the algorithm, right? They basically take away whatever value you might be generating, for instance, right? So that's kind of something that is in Web2. In Web3, though, you have a direct relationship with the end user, which means you can build much more direct relationships between each other as an entity. Because now, for instance, if I own an NFT, like a Bored Ape or a Mochaverse, I know every other person who owns one too. And the fact that I don't know your name, but the fact that you own one means I can trust you already because you have something at stake, right? So that means I can genuinely know that you're a real user. You're not just someone who's following, right? It's kind of like, imagine in the physical world, if I could hang out with everyone else. I mean, I don't have cars, but let's say if you owned a Lamborghini, you'd have a very different relationship if you were connecting with other Lamborghini owners. Right. If you could genuinely know that you have a Lamborghini, as opposed to some guy, oh, I love Lambos, great, but do you own one? It's a different type of construct, right? So you have a different level of trust and a different reputation, which comes down to the point that to build a strong network, you have to have strong reputation. And how do you build lasting reputation? I think this is where NFTs come in, which is what we're doing with Mocha, and also how do you act online, right? That's a critical part of it. And again, the paradigms also are different because now you reward the end user directly. You're not paying Facebook and Google lots of marketing dollars to sort of buy you and get you a user. You're paying the user directly with an incentive to say, come try my product. And if he likes your product, they'll stay. And if he doesn't like, he'll leave, obviously. But at least you've spent the marketing dollars giving value to the very user that you're trying to attract. And also, you can actually get to that user. Let's say you're launching an NFT project and you wanted to reach Bored Ape user. Easy. You don't have to talk to anyone. You can say, anyone who's a Bored Ape, come claim some tokens or try get a free claim. If he wants to, whatever. But the point is, as a Bored Ape holder, I get the benefit of knowing, so there's value that someone appreciates me, but also I get the benefit of interacting with a real owner of an asset.
Could you also talk about the notion of composability in that sense?
Well, absolutely. So the composability is built on top. What is composability? Composability isn't just that people can build cool stuff. It's building networks on top of networks, right? The compounding effect of Web3 is actually what composability enables, which is also the reason, by the way, why the private blockchains or the blockchains that didn't allow basically bridging or the portability aspects to flourish the way that they should have, they ended up becoming much more isolated. And therefore, they couldn't build network effects and they couldn't grow because they expected composability to only build on their chain, which is basically building a walled garden of some sort, right?
Right.
And all the chains that became more open and more interoperable actually grew, right? And, that means that I can take your asset and I can build something completely different because I know you're a real customer of that. I can build protocols. I can build, a DeFi protocol. I can build a liquidity pool if I wanted to. If I can build a new game. I could build a game using assets from Bored Ape or Mochaverse without ever having to talk to Yuga or to us for permission. And I can extract your customers, so to speak. But actually, that's not a negative. That's a benefit to the holders of the asset because they get more opportunity instead of going through a centralized platform that decides what you want to have, right? I mean, if you imagine in the physical world, traditional gaming world, if you could, if every Fortnite player and their skins were NFTs, how many companies do you think would offer utility for these NFTs?
Probably zero. Zero to none?
No, I think everyone. Because that's how I get access to the Fortnite customer. What's the Fortnite customer worth? A lot. How much money do I have to spend, Apple and Google, to access his customer? Which, Fortnite will never open. But if it's an NFT, I know he's a genuine player. I know he earned it or he bought it. That's a customer I want, right? And the same is true in the physical world. If I'm selling a luxury car, if I have the next, Ferrari or something, how do I reach the Ferrari owners? Oh, if I actually could target the person who owns a Ferrari, that's much more relevant. And that's actually when we talk about the composability and droppability, that's what's going to happen. It's not just, hey, I could use one asset and use another game. Actually, I offer this utility to access that customer. So we think that every game company in the world is going to give utility to NFTs. In the Web2 paradigm, that's life-threatening because my goodness, my customers are going away.
Right.
But in the Web3 version, I can earn a share of the transaction fee. My assets in the game become more valuable. If there's more network effects and utility that happen within the ownership of the assets of, let's call it Fortnite skins, then actually the Fortnite game ecosystem becomes even larger. And this, by the way, is the premise of something like Roblox, right? Roblox actually isn't valuable because they make the biggest game. They're valuable because everyone else is making games on top of that, right? That example of where they've contained these data, which is kind of where Sandbox wants to go as well.
So what's the missing piece for audience or most people traditionally in Web2 to be able to understand all of this? Is it really an education or maybe?
It's mostly education, we think. I mean, it's not hard to open a wallet. I mean, a lot of people say complexity. I agree, it's complex, but it's only complex because you don't understand it. People used to think going online was complex. People used to think a mobile phone, like a smartphone, was complex. I mean, I remember a time when people were saying, why would you use this when I have a BlackBerry, right? Because it has a keyboard. That was simpler, so to speak, right? Yeah, no one's saying that anymore, right? And really, what's happened wasn't the so-called convenience. It was an education, right? It was something that there was a social group that could educate you. Lots of people knew it, and it became a social norm. People say, well, isn't a bank account, opening a bank account easier? Not at all, right? If you objectively look at how difficult it is to open a bank account, it's very hard. But in our social norms, it's become easy to do so, right? It's like, oh, yeah, I go to a bank and I wait half an hour and do my KYC and show my receipt. Nothing's easy about that, but it's become normal to do that. So I think that's part of that. So I think that when you look at education, narrative is very important. I think we as humans learn through storytelling. Look at how games have created new narratives that we learn about. My kids and our kids will be able to tell stories about Pokemon and Call of Duty and League of Legends much better than probably the history textbook, right? But they can do that because they've been engaged in the story, right? And they can learn this through that. So storytelling, I think, is important. The reason that I think it's important is because to be really included in Web3, you need to become more financially literate. And everyone in this festival here at Coinfest is broadly already financially literate to some extent, right? I mean, they're interested in tokens, they're interested in NFTs, they're interested in investing. They're kind of that class of people that get it. But it's only a single-digit percentage in the world that can be calling themselves truly financial literate, right? Most of the world doesn't understand money, is afraid of investing, is kind of scared of that. And that, I think, is part of the education. And to me, if Web3 succeeds the way that we think it will, actually, in turn, it will also have created a much more larger base of people who are financially literate. Vietnam is a good example, right? People who didn't know anything about money playing Axie started learning about money, right? And through a game. And suddenly they became investors and stuff. And their quality of life has broadly improved because they understand some of these constructs that school would never teach them.
So following your activities online, recently, actually, I see a lot of activities over your LinkedIn. Are you guys doing anything right now in the educational space for what?
Yes. So Open Campus, which is EDU, is a big area of focus for us. We're trying to really help grow the space. We're funding a lot of education activities. We're also trying to bring teachers into it because we think teachers create intellectual property that actually could be monetized for, in blockchain because it's IP protection, which again is a very good use case for NFTs. So education is a key component of that. And I think also, the reason we're focusing on younger education is that we think that, if we can teach our children algebra, we can certainly teach them something about compound interest and sort of, a certain type of, financial education. That's something we can teach our children at a young age. And we think that's very important to do that. So we're trying to help push that, not just through games, but also through, Open Campus and bringing in students. So what we're now doing with EDU is we've launched essentially, this is where we are doing a sort of L3 chain because we want to bring everyone in the education world into basically the blockchain.
L3 chain.
Yeah, basically it's it's a way in which we can allow essentially people to use blockchain technology, but start essentially from a new infrastructure that is more friendly for them, because maybe building on top of Ethereum would be a little bit too complex at start. And so we think that's a way. So we're launching nodes and all that stuff. So for us, that's a way to bring universities, high schools, primary schools, education institutions, basically into Web3.
So going back to kind of Web3 financial business fundamentals again, considering that you guys invest in quite a lot of different companies as well as your portfolio, do you have any advice particularly for founders looking to fundraise? Should they bootstrap, fundraise aggressively? When would be a good stage for either? And any general advice for the metal?
Well, I think it's all relative to how much you're raising, what stage you're raising at. If you're raising on the basis of a PowerPoint, obviously that's super age, right? It's accelerated stage, which we do as well. But that, depends on the valuation, right? So, don't come to us with a PowerPoint for $100 million valuation, right? I mean, it's all relative towards that, right? If you have a more mature project that you've got already an MVP or use case, and again, so to me, it's a little bit about the stages and also what partnerships you want to bring in. So you want to bring Animoca in because we can help you a certain way. You work with the Mocaverse, bring your audience. Sure, we can have a talk about that. But also we have to think about whether we're the right fit for the project, right? So for instance, there's some companies that have come to us and asked us to help them securitizing assets. That's not who we are. So it's not relevant for us. But when it's about gaming and culture and entertainment, then yes, do talk to us, because I think we can help you, right? So what value add can we offer there? But for founders, generally, I would look at, at least if you want to talk to companies like us, is when you're thinking about building a business, which is for us very consumer focused, think about the networks you're building and where your network effects can grow, and how does the token play the role in that? And that's the important component for us to think about, because you're building networks. And if you don't understand how you're building networks, which is why community is important, and this is why sometimes community builders can raise capital fairly, easier than maybe even some people with a strong tech, because they have demonstrated an ability to understand what makes a community and how to build a network from within that, right? And I think this is a combination. You need both the tech and you need the community building, because you need to understand network effects and you need to know how to sort of expand these network effects, right? I think that to us is a fundamental insight for founders that they need to have. A lot of people, especially the Web 2.5 category, and then the reason why I'm sometimes critical of Web 2.5 is not because I understand the idea of onboarding from Web 2 to Web 3. But the question is, which side of Web 2.5 are you on? Are you like Web 2.6 or Web 2.4? Like, are you more Web 3 or are you more Web 2?
So what would be an example of Web 2.5?
A bad Web 2.5 example is I'm using a token to raise money, right? As a non-dilutive form of equity. That to me doesn't make sense, right? And then because you're actually giving away a part of your network. It's a different stack of the value chain, shall we say, but it is a part of the network they're giving. And we think of tokens really as liabilities, right? Because when you're giving someone a piece of your network, you're actually sort of, giving sort of, a liability essentially to the to whoever's owning that as a construct in one form or the other, which some founders don't think that way, right? They think of tokens as simply as a way of raising money, right? And maybe they think of it more like a currency, which has a certain network effect, but it doesn't have one that's so composable, right? That's an example of us where they're really trying to build a traditional game and they're just looking at it as a way to raise money. And there's a lot of projects that are out there like that, right? Whereas the kind of companies that are thinking about building true networks that are owned by the end user have different tokenomic models, and they think about it differently, and they maybe focus more on the building of the token because they understand where the value resides. The equity has value too, but has a different construct than the token, for instance, right? I mean, that's a part that I think founders need to understand. And of course, the other thing is, do they agree in some of our philosophical perspectives, which is that building in a shared network. Like, we believe that in Web3, it's about building a shared network. Your contributions have positive net effects to the broader ecosystem. That's not something that I would say is also broadly understood by a lot of people. They're all thinking about, how do I build more closed? When I reach a certain kind of success, how do I concentrate everything in? Which again, in Web3 doesn't work quite the same way.
On the notion of tokenomics, how should founder really approach this problem? Is it a case by case per business model?
And it's definitely case by case, right? I don't think you can just take a cookie cutter approach and say, this is what this company did, I'm doing this, because I think it begins with understanding what's the fundamental of your network effect. And then from that, you can build your tokenomics.
Gotcha. So lastly for the section, I think many of the audience is also actually interested in this question and understanding more about this is there new ways that Web3 allow for a new form of revenues or new ways to kind of engage with consumers that ultimately result in other forms of revenue streams?
I mean, there's so many, right? I would say one of the most fundamental things that people haven't yet tapped into is how you more broadly monetize and protect your intellectual property rights. One of the challenges that we have in the IP world, within pre-NFTs, is that if I wanted to protect my IP, it had to be worth a certain amount of revenue for me to hire a lawyer and do all that kind of stuff to do that first. But now with an NFT, I can actually immortalize and prove my provenance of something for less than $1. And then that's a way in which you can protect that IP because you can put that on chain, right? And that has really sort of lasting effects because now you can allow capital formation for things that might only be worth $10 or $20 a year, which is kind of what's happening in gaming. Where, for instance, one representation of that is if I own an Axie and it might be worth hundreds of dollars, but I could earn thousands of dollars of value. Now it has capital value that I can pass on. You can't do that in the gaming world, not just because of permission, but there's no framework to prove that provenance and ownership. Or for instance, if you're a teacher, you can basically tokenize through Open Campus your education work, and that might only make $10 or $20 a year, but that revenue stream can now be owned by someone else, and there you could sell it for maybe 5 or 10 times of that value because someone's happy to have that dividend over the next 5 or 10 years because, again, it has a property rights protection aspect of it. I mean, to me, it's like imagine what the music industry was like if you had no IP protection for music. There'd be no Taylor Swift, no BTS, no Michael Jackson, no Beatles, would not be listening to great music. There would be no investment. There'd be no ability to grow the space because there's no money in that instance, right? Because it starts with intellectual property. So that's a big untapped area that I think hasn't really been fully sort of mapped out. But the other area, of course, is just broadly around, for marketing. Airdrops to me is one of the most amazing ways in which you can acquire users. And again, if you think about it properly, you will need to make sure that you're airdropping it to the right users. And I think this is an insight we learned at Mochaverse. If you airdrop our NFTs, which are obviously fairly valuable today, and also tokens to the right audience, then they're the ones who will use it, right? But if most of the audience are speculators, which is of course something you have to be aware of in Web3, then their only interest is to sell and make money and move on to the next project. And while you do need some of them, knowing that customer, knowing how you basically bring them in and who your right audience is and who resonates with your story, I think is a key insight that founders need to have. And sometimes founders are too heavily focused on, the quantum of liquidity, right? And they look at, hey, I need to sort of go into this exchange and go into this thing so I have the liquidity. That's relevant. But if your project doesn't have enough volume of core users to your project, then actually you're creating a negative effect. Because the people, I think of exchange listings as an education event, but you're not going to convert all of them to your project. Many of them are just going to airdrop and farm. And then what happens is that there's only one thing they're going to do, sell the token, which is actually a problem for you. Whereas if you build a community that owns this and has a sort of a desire to sort of build on top of it, then you've actually created a true community. And that's where the network effects of airdrops matter. When you build a reputation layer that we do with Mocha ID, I can now analyze what kind of user you are. For instance, even in the Web3 world, if you are an owner of a Bored Ape, do you want the Bored Ape owner that holds his Bored Ape for years and years? Or do you want the Bored Ape owner who is flipping it every day for a quick profit, right? And again, one project might like one customer, another project might want another. If you want someone who's a trader, well, then you go for that customer, which is kind of what Blur did, right? But if you want to go for a customer that actually sort of incentivizes sort of a long-time loyalty behavior, then you might go for a different type of gaming or different type of NFC projects, and you can measure that, right? So again, we have the tools to do it. We just need to be more mindful how we sort of bring the right audiences, then we can build the right culture. It's about the culture.
You've been mentioning a lot about kind of enforcing digital property rights. I think for a lot of people that's been exposed to NFTs, pricing going up and down. But from a digital, property rights perspective, how does NFT actually play a role in that? Maybe you could share a little bit about that as well.
I mean, first of all, NFTs, by nature of being non-fungible, have the ability to hold something unique. So whether this is an RWA, like a property deed, my house is not like your house, right? So how do I know that my house is different from your house? Well, this NFT is different than your NFT, right? That's a very simple example, as an example of that, right? But also, when you think about property rights, I think of property rights as not just value system. I think of something that means something to us, to our persona, right? I mean, in the real world, we wear different type of bags or we wear different kind of color clothes to identify who we are. We're kind of trying to expand a certain type of, persona that represents our culture, and sort of emanates our social capital. That's kind of what we're trying to do. And NFTs do that really, really well. The intellectual property rights aspect of that, outside of the examples I gave on education earlier, also means that when I own, for instance, like a Bored Ape, now I am also given a license in which I can monetize the likeness of that Bored Ape on a t-shirt or on artwork or in my own game, for instance, right? And while that's an early example, again, it's a way in which you can help distribute. And so Yuga became the company that it is really through its community, if you think about it, right? I mean, they didn't have a big marketing team. Most of it was organic, and they just simply grew because everyone else basically sort of owned a piece of the network and therefore had property rights, kind of quasi-shared property rights of their particular NFT, but one that the community owned overall, right? I think it's a really powerful way in which you can build communities. I mean, property rights, I think, is a fundamental. If you compare economies that don't have property rights or very low property rights, they tend to do really badly, right? But every economy that has strong property rights, GDPs are higher, value is higher, entrepreneurship is higher,
right?
Capitalism is higher.
So I guess we've kind of come to the end of the podcast, this episode. So one last question we have for you is, what are you most excited about Web3 heading into the future? How do you like to see the space transform? Let's say in the next 2 to 3 years, and then even further down the road, 5 to 2 years.
So one of the things that I'm really excited about is what we're building with Mochaverse. As I said earlier, we're trying to build a reputation layer in Web3. When you build reputation and you increase the level of reputation in whatever network you play, which in our case would be Web3, transactions increase because trust increases, right? So this is all about creating higher levels of trust. If I know that you're someone who has a good history, or if I know that you're someone who plays certain games, or if I know you're someone who holds tokens, or whatever it is that measure you're looking for, then I can transact with you more easily, or I can be more generous with you, or I can be more sort of, participatory with you, right? That's how the real world works. For instance, if you go on eBay, are you going to buy from someone who has a seller rating of, 99% good? Or are you going to buy with someone who never bought and sold and first-time buyer? I mean, it's a simple example of that, right? Why do we have ratings on, Grab or Uber, for instance? Because again, the seller rates or the ratings matter. They're a way in which we're trying to emanate trust. We're trying to say, he's a good guy because I've driven with him many times, or he's a good merchant because I've bought stuff from him, right? That's basically what we're trying to do. But in Mochaverse, we can now do this on a decentralized way with a reputation that you can stack and move across chains. For instance, in the gaming world, I can't move my reputation from Fortnite to Apex Legends or to Valorant. I can't do that, right? I'm actually a new identity every single time. But actually, if I could do that, I can build my communities better. I can create more frameworks. I can create more value overall. Also, someone will come to me and say, hey, you're a great Valorant player. I'd like you to try my game because it's kind of similar. And I think you'll appreciate it, for instance. Right? These are things you can now finally do. Huh? That's what we're trying to basically build with Mochaverse. And I think if we can build that trust layer, that reputation layer, as we hope to, then I think transaction rates, liquidity, trust will increase even greater, which I think will be a fundamental part of the ecosystem. So we're really excited about that. That's why we're investing so much in building in that space. And then the second part, of course, is, we're very bullish on the ton ecosystem. I mean, one of the challenges we had in Web3 gaming was distribution. Apple, Facebook, Google, they all didn't allow blockchain gaming to really flourish. Or in some cases, they outright banned it, like Steam said, you can't do it. Or Apple would say, you can have NFTs in the game, but you can have no utility, which basically means you can't launch an NFT game on Apple. But for Ton and Telegram, no such restriction. And, a lot of people are making fun of, it's just, clicker games or whatever. But to me, that's just the first wave, right? This whole tap to earn is really just the beginning of the first narrative to bring people into Web3. And then you open up the narrative and the channel for trying different things. It's kind of like in the early days of mobile gaming, Flappy Bird, for instance, or, Mafia Wars. I mean, these were all early kind of games that were very simple as well, but they led to the development of the gaming industry as we see it today.
Awesome. Any final last word for our audience, both here as well as all the way back in Vietnam?
Well, so first of all, I mean, it's great that you all are building in Web3. I think, as I said earlier, we're building in a shared network. So everyone who is building in it is adding value overall. So, thank you for that. But I think that Web3 provides a way in which you can actually create a fairer world, right? More equity, participation in this new asset class that is essentially the network effect. And I'm super excited about the space. And it's really the product for the next generation. I mean, you're all digitally natives. I'm actually a digital immigrant, right? I wasn't born at a time when everything was online, but you are. So this is your world. So keep building in that space.
Awesome. That's it. Huge thank you for taking the time here. I hope you guys learned something new, and we'll see you guys next time.